From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi again. Welcome to the show. First of all, a round of congratulations to Mayor Rahm Emanuel for reaching the halfway point in his first term. Looks like he's kicking off the second half with a big bang. He's been dominating the news this week with his plans to build an arena for DePaul at the McCormick Place campus, and you, dear viewer, will help to buy it for them. And he's telling us that he so believes in President Obama's health care program that he's going to push about 30,000 retired city workers onto it. And he's moving ahead with that incredibly ambitious plan. Remember the plan they announced to reinvent Navy Pier with monorails and sweeping vistas down to the water, a new Ferris wheel? Well, except that he's not going to do any of those things, just add some new restaurant space and reconfigure the front yard a little bit. And we can count on the expansion of the Children's Museum since that's already been announced about, I think, 6 times. By the way, parenthetically, here at Chicago Newsroom, we have a strict guideline about mayoral announcements. You're allowed a pre-announcement, which is usually a leak to the Sun-Times, the announcement itself at a big press concert, big press event of some kind, and then a post-announcement at a civic function, and maybe one groundbreaking. No more. The Children's Museum, I think, is in gross violation of the Chicago Newsroom rule. We have competing pension plans in Springfield, a possible same-gender marriage law. Let's not forget the casino, slot machines at Midway, anyone? And my personal favorite, a recognition that those red light cameras were never about public safety. We told you that. They're about dinging you for some extra money. All right, here to help us understand all of this from the Sun-Times, editorial page editor Tom McNamee.
Good to be here.
Welcome back. And Tony Arnold joining us from WBEZ, can we call you the Springfield bureau chief?
Sure, yeah, right.
The guy who talks about Springfield a lot, and that's why it's so important to have you here today, because there is so much going on in Springfield. We talked a little bit before the show and agreed that we're just going to have to talk very fast and talk over each other today because we've got so much to cover. School closings, we got these retiree health benefits, Elevate Chicago, the big thing, red line closing, parking meters, red light cameras, traffic cameras, all that stuff. And it's just a busy, busy week. So?
You know, what you said was so true about how they have 3 different ways of bringing out a big announcement. Yesterday,
you ought to know.
Yesterday, City Hall rolled out to selected media this whole plan for McCormick Place and for Navy Pier. And I was on the phone this morning, the day after, with one of my colleagues saying, well, what are we? And the colleague said, well, Rahm's going to have this big meeting about that today. And I said, wasn't that yesterday? I realized that's how it works. And then the day after today, I'll get an op-ed or 2 from somebody from City Hall in support of this.
Not someone from the mayor's office, though, right?
It'll be someone who's an interested party who, will have, and it might even be a good op-ed. We might even run it.
Yeah.
But it's very sophisticated. It will have come from a prompt from the mayor's office, and it will have been vetted by the mayor's office.
Viewers to this show have heard ad nauseum me mention, just by way of disclosure, that I used to work in Mayor Daley's press office.
Oh, that's right.
I have never seen anything like the press operation that Rahm Emanuel runs. It is formidable, and we've had so many reporters on here who say that they're just deluged with calls from them every day. It's like, what are you working on today? Can we help you with that? No, what you're saying there is wrong. Don't report that.
It's exactly what happens.
It's amazing. It's
exactly
amazing.
What happens.
Yeah. So Elevate Chicago was an interesting way of. I want to talk about Springfield first, but we always digress on this show.
Yeah.
This notion that he wants to push this DePaul Stadium idea for whatever reason. And the best way to do it is to add it to the Navy Pier thing, which is really not much of an announcement at all. But then you package it up and you call it Elevate Chicago, and you got something there. You got a multi-million-dollar investment in the future of Chicago.
Right.
You put a name on it. You call this. We're going to address the tourism aspect of this and how Navy Pier is going to be changing. They had a contest a few months ago about all these different designs of how to changed Navy Pier. They put one of them had a sculpture in the middle of Lake Michigan,
Right.
and so now they chose the winner, and that kind of just went away for a while, and now here we are back and saying they're going to put I think I heard a fountain at the front of Navy Pier,
some skating rink in the winter,
skating rink, a new staircase to the Ferris wheel, Children's Museum, not going to Millennium Park. It's going to be expanding. So Navy Pier is due for some changes, and then now McCormick Place with this.
And McCormick Place is going to get a couple changes too, like a subsidized stadium for DePaul. By the way,
I think some hotels might be added too. I think some of the draw might be Chicagoans should be going to these places that just aren't right now. They're designed for tourists.
So I mean, is that stadium is the real idea there that's where Celine Dion is going to be performing when?
Wouldn't that be exciting?
When the casino is in the old McCormick Place, Lakeside Center, that's going to be the casino. And
well, we'll see if the casino. Let's not hold our breath on that casino first,
Lou Lang says it's going to happen.
The interesting thing is when the City Hall, when the mayor wraps these things up together and calls it Elevate Chicago, he defines the conversation. He frames the conversation. And our job is to not let that happen.
Yeah.
The reality is that Navy Pier, McCormick Place are very, very different issues.
They serve different people.
And as in my first blush reaction when I see this, and I don't know what our editorial page will say, is that the Navy Pier thing makes sense. It's not too much fiddling around with Navy Pier, and that's fine with me. I think Navy Pier should be a little cheesy. Cheesy's okay by me. So, on the other hand, then this McCormick Place deal with the stadium for DePaul is a completely separate issue. It raises all kinds of, as Rick Tellner made one great point. Why would DePaul students want to have to go all the way down to McCormick Place to watch a basketball game? It makes no sense. It's supposed to be a college ball game, all right? And then Mark Brown and others made the point this morning that they say it's supposed to be a stadium for the city and DePaul will just be a tenant for 18 games a year. But they're also giving DePaul the right to name the thing, which suggests it's more than just being a tenant. And this all has to be sorted out. We sort of have to look at it coldly, objectively, and not be snowballed.
I think you and others have pointed out that, comparatively speaking, it's not enough money to save the schools or to save the pensions or any of that kind of thing, but it's a significant amount of money that the taxpayers are going to be on the line for. And there was no effort to use that for the Cubs, for example. Because
we fought that.
Well, so we're loading in a bunch of TIF money into this program, which seems weird to me. And not to get all Jurovsky on everybody, but it's just kind of like that money is supposed to be used for developing underserved.
Well, they've been looking at that McCormick Place campus for years, though. Mayor Daley was looking at that, and the Michael Reese site, which is close to that. And so they've been trying to figure out some plan of what can we actually put in.
And it's not the first time they've talked about building an open-air stadium or some kind of stadium at McCormick Place. It's been around for 20, 30 years.
Well, I do think, though, that you judge these things individually on their merits. It's so often, I think it's a false argument when people say something like, how can you give money to Navy Pier, let's say, at a time when the schools are closing. As if somehow, it's like saying I can't go to a movie and enjoy myself because there are starving children in Africa.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
It's just a false equivalency. The reality is the city has to do both things at once. It has to do its best by its schools. I'm not sure it is, but it has to. And at the same time, it has to build the economic engine of Chicago, which can mean sometimes tax subsidies. I'm not sure that's the case here, but this happens a lot. People tell me, well, meanwhile, in this neighborhood, we don't have this, and you're doing this. And I say, what? I don't think that's an honest way of looking at things.
I think you're right about that. The issue, of course, just has been where these priorities are, because I just can't imagine if you were to list the top 30 things that Chicago needed right now, a 10,000 seat stadium at 21st and Prairie.
You don't think so?
Wouldn't be on that list, right? So if you were Joe Moore, let's say, and the 49th Ward was running this, and you have all the community come in and set their priorities where the stop signs should be, they wouldn't put their TIF money into that, I would think. But
that's a good point. Even Prairie Avenue people, because it's right on the southern edge of the Prairie Avenue Historic District.
That's right.
Which is where my daughter got married, so I'm well familiar with it. Yeah. It's really an amazing little stretch.
It's a beautiful little enclave,
and if you put a giant stadium at the southern end of it,
right at the end of the street.
So much for taking a walk with the dog.
Yeah. Tony, where are we? We have these amazing competing pension plans from the Senate and the House with Cullerton and with Madigan, and I'm just finding it incredibly fascinating. What's happening?
Where are we? We're about where we were a year ago.
Without much new.
Yeah, right.
Check back with you in a year.
The Senate has passed a plan that is similar in scope to what it did last year, that didn't get the support or even called for a vote in the House. That's different this time, that is significant, is that the House voted on a separate plan that Speaker Madigan supports. And so now you have the unions aligned with Cullerton in the Senate bill, and Madigan aligned with the majority of the House members. And right now there's no clash. Both sides say mine's more constitutional than yours. And that's what this is all about. This is all about the lawsuit that's going to ensue, whether there will be one or not, which most
But I mean,
people
basically what we're talking about, though, is the difference is how much money they
That's a big part of it, sure.
Plan, right?
Cullerton's plan, he makes the case that mine is legal, therefore it's going to save X amount. And then the House plan, and the House plan is not legal, it's unconstitutional, therefore it saves $0, and we're going to lose a year or two of even more going down this rabbit hole of spending more money. I think the last report I just saw said the state is spending almost a quarter of its general revenue money for pensions. That's a significant amount. It used to be less than 10%.
Now, your newspaper, your editorial page has come down on the side
Madigan's
of Madigan's side.
And we do that knowing that, here's the deal. Madigan's plan would save about $150 billion over the life of this pension pay-in. That's a ton of money. We have a $100 billion deficit right now. And then the Cullerton plan would save about $47 billion.
That's about right.
And that would require, and even to save that much money, it would require that enough state employees choose this option to have reduced pensions in return for having health care. There's no guarantee they'll take that. And if they don't take that, if they say, hey, you know what? I'd rather have the pension as I have it. I can do without the health care. My spouse has health care, or whatever. Then the savings is not even $47 billion. It's considerably less. The point there is that the Cullerton plan won't get us even close to solving our pension crisis. We'll all be back here in a year anyway, trying to figure out where to make up the rest of it. So that is on the one side. On the other side, I think John Cullerton is sincere and when he says that the Madigan plan won't pass constitutional muster. The courts won't go for it. You can't reduce pensions according to the state constitution unless you give people a choice in the matter. So our position has been, it's all going to go to court anyway. Let's put our money on the pension plan that, if it gets through the courts, will actually solve the problem. And in a year from now, if it doesn't, we can immediately turn to the next one and try something else.
There's another element to this too of who should even be paying for pensions. Speaker Madigan he calls it the free lunch that districts outside of Chicago in the suburbs and downstates called the cost shift, where he wants to shift. Right now the state pays for teachers' pensions in the suburbs and downstate. He wants the school districts to do that, universities. School districts say, hey, our property taxes, we'll put something on the ballot, a referendum saying we'll up our property taxes. Universities say we'll have to increase tuition. That's a big issue that Speaker Madigan says he wants to have happen. He does not want the state paying those pensions. It's very contentious. It's pitting the suburbs against the city.
And there's a really good reason for Madigan wanting to do that, right? I mean, I think the reason he wants to do that is because pensions are based on your final salary. If you're an employee, if you're a superintendent of schools in Northbrook, your final pension is based on how much money you make. So the state pays the pension, but that final salary is decided by the school board.
Right.
So they decide how much we, these taxpayers of Illinois, will have to pay in pension for that person. Madigan's feeling is, hey, if you want to increase someone's salary, by all means, but then you're stuck with paying the pension as well. Take responsibility.
Well, I mean, we've seen that all over government, not only in Illinois, I'm sure, but we're familiar with Illinois, where people who've worked for 10 or 15 years for the city or the state or whatever it is miraculously get promoted in the last week or two to some deputy superintendent position, and suddenly their final salary.
No, we all took the wrong path in life. We should have
public employee worker.
Yeah, we should have done that.
Well, I guess another full disclosure is involved here because I did work for the city for about 12 years. I have a small pension from the city of Chicago and am one of those retirees. So, those 30,000 people, I think I'm one of them. I'm not even sure, but who knows?
Are you in AFSCME also? Are you in the radio union?
No.
But you are.
No.
What is that union for people on the radio?
AFTRA.
You're not in that?
No.
I am.
You are?
Yeah,
because you used to work at WLS
for 5 years,
right.
and I get a pension for that. It's about $40 a year.
Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah. Well, so all right. So the question I've been wanting to ask you guys is this just another piece of very clever posturing on the part of Cullerton and Madigan? Did Cullerton say, okay, let's play good cop, bad cop, I'll be the good cop, I'll sit down with the unions, I'll come up with something that the unions can maybe tolerate, and then when it all comes out in the wash, we'll go with your thing? I mean, is that even too cynical for this show?
No, you're certainly not the first person to suggest that. I've seen that theory in a few other places, and part of this too is that I've heard too that this could be Speaker Madigan's grand plan for next year's election, statewide
There's
election.
always politics too.
There's always politics considered in the government side of this.
He wants to get it cleared up before his daughter becomes governor.
Right. And so there's not. What I would say is that it's not like Cullerton and Madigan don't like each other. They're both Chicago Democrats. They've known each other forever.
One of them is the godfather to the other's kid.
Cullerton is, right. So there's it's not like, I think it's just purely, this is, between the two of them, this is more just a philosophical difference on the legal aspect of this. And Cullerton doesn't want, I think that this has been such an issue for so long. There is an element of this of, do we really want to bring this up again for another session, make more cuts?
Is it churlish to point out that this problem has been around for decades, probably 30 years, and that Mr. Madigan has been a significant player in Illinois politics for about that same amount of time?
Yeah, a reporter just asked him about that down there, and I think he corrected him on the number of years that he's been down there. He didn't really answer the question. He said it's 43 years that I've been down here. Yeah.
So he must have taken a few votes in those years on this, and when they were taking all those pension holidays, I'm sure he probably thought that was a good idea back in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
I think he acknowledges that. When they had the floor discussion on the House bill, 2 weeks ago now, one of the questions to Madigan was, how did we get into the situation? And Madigan said something rather droll. He said, it's not unfair to say we have been a very generous legislature for many years. It was his way of acknowledging they all just gave away the store forever.
Kind of reminds me of Harry Reid yesterday talking about this sequester thing and how he thought it was really kind of a disgraceful vote that the Senate voted 100% to give the money back to the FAA so they could all get home for the weekend. And really that was really not a good thing we all did, but I did it too. It's terrible.
A little political spin on this I find interesting is I actually, because I've talked to John Cullerton over the years about this, I actually think he's very sincere about the constitutionality of this. I don't think the votes on his plan were necessarily so high-minded. I think many of the people in the Senate, many of the Democrats, were looking for an out so they wouldn't have to offend their union constituency. And for Cullerton, that works well too. It's remarkable how self-interest seems to jibe with high constitutional principles.
We've got to save some time to talk about school closings because you've been doing such, I will say, good work on that. But before we leave Springfield, same-gender marriage, what do you think?
I think it would have been called for a vote by now if they had the votes in the House of Representatives. It's been 3 months now since the Senate passed it. It's been sitting in the House. It got out of committee by one vote, and that vote pretty much came as the representative said, I don't know if I can vote on this on the floor. I'm doing this as a kind of a favor to the people who who support this, and so that we can actually have a discussion about this on the floor.
Yeah.
So it barely got out of committee. Now we're just kind of sitting waiting to see if they hit that 60 vote mark. In the meantime, I've been kind of talking to some different businesses and people in the wedding planning business, and just kind of saying, well, we could be a big summer for us. If this doesn't happen, we'll keep waiting and seeing.
So, I mean, I guess there's no. It's always a stupid question to say, what do you think is going to happen? But I mean, is it possible they can get these votes? Or, I mean, we're seeing a lot of very strong reaction coming back from the religious community and that kind of thing, and maybe they're holding.
Both sides are very well organized, very well funded. I think I've heard that the supporters of this bill just kind of are getting restless, and I've heard from some of the people, not the sponsors, but the people who will be voting yes. So just call it for a vote. There are people who might have a change of heart or actually make a decision one way or the other once they see that bill number on the board, they hit their green button.
I mean, it's true though. You say on the one hand, when you talk to these folks, they say, we think we can get it this year. On the other hand, as you point out, if they can get it there, what's the holdup?
What's the holdup? Right.
They haven't called it to a vote
I think
yet.
that's such an interesting point. It's sort of like what we were seeing with the gun bill and everything else. Like, just vote already. Stop this tactic of holding it back because you don't want to go on the record.
Well, there is one other element, which is that some people think that a vote like this ultimately becomes tied in with other votes, like even a pension vote. That if you want our votes on this, which is not politically popular for me, then you're going to have to do this for me in a pension bill, which may not be popular. So sometimes what looks like complete dysfunction is a log rolling that doesn't get resolved until the last 10 minutes of the legislative session. And there are two groups they're really leaning on. One is African American legislators who are getting all kinds of pressure from black preachers, ministers, including robocalls, not to support same-sex marriage. And the other group is Republicans. And we just wrote an editorial about this. I honestly think that there's always this middle ground of people who in their gut know that same-sex marriage is coming. And they're going to look back and they're going to say, was I on the right side of this? Like, would I have been on the right side of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954? Would I have been on the right side of having this first Supreme Court justice who's a woman? And this is one of those issues where I think there are a handful of people in their gut knows that when the history books are written, they'd like to be on the right side of history, and they know what it is. And I'm kind of hoping maybe, idealistically, a few of those people will step up. They need 3 to 5 votes.
Okay, we talked about important vote coming up. We got to switch topics here. The important vote that we're all looking at is May 22nd, next Wednesday, right? That's at the Board of Education. They're gonna vote on this, whatever it is, how many ever, 53 schools and 11 consolidations affecting something like, you guys said, what, 50,000, 40,000 students will be affected one way or another?
I don't remember the number. It's a lot.
It's huge. It's just absolutely huge. So we saw this most amazing phenomenon where these retired judges, and it was amazing to go to some of these hearings and see there's just people sitting at the table and there's people running around yelling and screaming and they're just kind of taking notes, and if a direct question is asked, they just say, we're not here to answer your questions, we're just here to report back to Barbara Byrd Bennett, and the whole thing just seems so cynically awful. I mean, just kind of like, sure, go ahead, say what you want. We're just going to do what we do anyway. But then the judges, some of them kind of rebelled, and they agreed with some of your editorials about about some of these schools just absolutely should not be closed, and some of them maybe can be closed, and then there's a bunch of them in the middle. It's a very subtle, very complicated issue, and it's not something you can just take one vote and slam all these schools closed.
I think it'd be very difficult for the school board, but they may do this on Wednesday, on 22nd, to simply vote to close all these schools, 53, 54, depends on how you count, after the judges have weighed in. These are retired judges making these points. After the editorial pages, even the Tribune has finally come around to this. And after all of these hearings,
even
people,
the Tribune?
Well, their editorial page didn't really take a stand until recently on this. And now I look and say, well, their stand is similar to ours, which is that there's somewhere in the middle we have to strike a balance. It'll be remarkable if they still close all of them. Their argument on their side, frankly, is that people don't appreciate that the entire process to get to the closure list in itself was incredibly open, incredibly democratic, incredibly thoughtful to begin with. And so therefore, it's not as if they just threw a bunch of school names on a wall, so we're going to close these. And from that point on, they're pretty committed to closing the schools. And they're right about that first part. It was a much more open process than the schools are traditionally known to undertake to even get to that original list. We still maintain they're going way too fast with too many schools. We'd like to see them do it over 2 years and fewer schools.
It's been interesting to see the people who don't have a stake in the game necessarily weigh in on this. The judges that you're talking about, they didn't have to weigh in on this. There's some lawmakers in Springfield who brought it up and is calling for what you are saying, that to wait another year here, put a moratorium on this, and that. There's been crickets on that lately, but Springfield doesn't like getting involved in these hyper-local issues. But it's just interesting to see how much this issue stretches across not just parents or teachers. It's the whole city.
The whole thing, though, Tom, you talk about this public process, but the whole thing has been so deeply cynical from the beginning. I mean, it starts out as we have $1 billion deficit. We got to do this for the money, and then it's proven that it's actually going to cost more money to close them than it would if they left them open. So they back off that argument, and then the argument becomes we're doing this to improve the academics for these kids.
You don't believe that either.
And then it turns out that,
So
as
what's
you
the
and others have
motivation,
pointed
then?
out, it really doesn't make a lot of difference.
But if their
for many of
motivation
them.
is not to save money, which I think they did overstate, now they're conceding this, and if their motivation is not to improve academics, what's the motivation?
Well,
their end?
There are a lot of theories. I don't subscribe to any one of them in particular, but one that's kind of interesting is the fact that a large part of the reason that the schools are so underpopulated is because they've opened so many charters adjacent to those schools.
That would be a motivation.
Right? So
I think that is a really great point, Ken. I mean, whenever we have these conversations, the schools try to pretend that the opening of charter schools is a completely separate issue.
Right.
Common sense says it's not a separate issue. They're the same kids. If they don't go to this school, they're going to go to that school.
Right. And then you end up with the kind of situations that you've been writing, and WBEZ has been doing excellent work on this. Both of you got your organizations, where it's the what do you want to call them, the throwaway populations that really get screwed in this. You have special needs kids in these schools who are not being accommodated in the charters, and their percentage is rising in the classic schools because all the other kids are getting creamed out. Right. And then you just you'll take a school that has, as you have pointed out so well, you'll take a school that's got 30 or 40 special needs kids, and you'll just dump them into another school that's got 30 or 40 special needs kids without the appropriate help that these kids really need.
That's why there's a federal lawsuit now. I mean, it just filed recently. The union filed a lawsuit on those two things. Disabilities, that kids with special needs aren't going to be able to go further to a new school, and then another one about African American kids are disproportionately affected by these.
Not
by these
to mention
closures.
the safety issues, and I know you guys have actually walked these.
Yeah, I mean, there are
routes.
so many good arguments for not doing it the way they're doing, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. I mean, the special needs one, we've just made that point. Our editorial page agrees that we're concerned about whether you can do this school closure in a way that doesn't affect them in a bad way, the kids who have disabilities. We're not real sympathetic to the racial argument. Frankly, the African American population of Chicago has really dropped. The schools that have seen the greatest loss have been in the black neighborhoods, and it was inevitable that those would be the schools that would have to close. But for lots of good reasons, they should.
We have to leave it there.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. We didn't get to talk about the parking meter thing, but we'll do that another time, okay? Tony Arnold from WBEZ, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on the show. And Tom McNamee, Chicago Sun-Times editorial page editor. Glad to have you both here. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom because you like to. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can find us here on cable, and you can see this show any old time you want by going to this address that you will see in just a moment right here on the screen, or you can subscribe to iTunes, audio, video, all that stuff. I'm Ken Davis, gone next week, but Charlie Meyerson will be in this seat, so the show will elevate in quality just amazingly. Wait till you see it. See you in a couple weeks.